subject of the session is bye-bye mass media and infobesity, hello, pro-sumption and personalization. We have a couple of ¿Cómo está? We have a couple of new trends in a new world of journalism which is emerging. Maybe we have 6 or 7 trends. First, news consumers are also producers of information. Second, links become as important as conventional contents. Third, massive audience gives the place to individual communal communities and personalized users. Fourth, journalists are obsessed not just to create and explain the news, but also to explore the most interesting way or platform to distribute it. So, fifth, competing is a convenience, but collaborating probably is a necessity between us and with the citizens. Six, selection is again in the core of our activity. And we have to rescue and to reformulate values and standards of journalism in order to enhance quality and dignity. So we have in this panel, we have the right persons to explore, detail, develop these trends. 3 very different profiles. Robert Amlung, Dan Gillmor, Pieter Franken. We have Robert, who is both in the intersection between broadcast and digital, online. So the only paper-oriented person in the panel is the moderator, which shows a bit the idea of the GN ambition to break borders between us. Dan is one of the fathers of the Constitution, the fathers of the Constitution of the new trends in journalism. He's an academician, but not only. He's also a practitioner. He's a very well-known writer and blogger, and a pioneer in that. And Pieter Franken comes from the world of technology. He's not only a good athlete, as you saw coming up to the scenario, but he has put his expertise on information operations through the technology point of view. So I would like to ask the 3 panelists to present a bit the summary of the ideas that they will after develop. Robert, he's the head of a digital strategy in CDF Germany. Robert Amlung joined Germany's national public broadcaster in 2001 as deputy head of new media, taking charge of the whole department in 2006. He worked, among other things, on the introduction of ZDF on-demand video service. Robert is a TV news journalist by training, with a strong background in IT as well. Before working to ZDF, he was working in ARD's central newsroom in Hamburg, and he was responsible for several innovation projects in TV news. In 1996, he founded ARD news website Tagesschau Tagesschau? Tagesschau.de. So, Robert, you have the floor. Thank you.
Thank you, Xavier. My thesis for this morning is that journalism will be the same and changing profoundly at the same time. And coming from one of the traditional mass news organizations, we have to accept that the old ways of doing things are getting not replaced, but are getting, well, they're not the only way of doing things anymore. There are new things coming up, and I will focus about these new things that can be quite a surprise at times a few minutes later.
Thank you. Dan Gillmor is founding director of the Knight Center for Digital Media and Entrepreneurship in the States. Is an international recognized author and director of the Knight Center for Digital Media Entrepreneurship at Arizona State University, and also director of the Center for Citizen Media. In '94, he joined the San Jose Mercury News, writing a widely read column and blog. His blog is believed to have been the first by a journalist for a mainstream journalism organization. In 2004, he published With the Media, Grassroots Journalism by the People, for the People. He serves on boards of directors or advisory boards for several media-related nonprofits, including the Knight New Media Center at USA and UC Berkeley, Global Voices Online and News Trust, and is also a distinguished member of the GEN board. Dan, please.
Thank you. It's an honor to be with you all, and I want to briefly, when we show our slides here, talk about the notion that what we all have to do is understand the change, the significant change in journalism and media in general is from the lecture that we used to give into a conversation, and that conversation is a word with many meanings and a lot of nuance, and that we can, if we frame our future as conversation, I think much will stem from that.
Thank you, Dan. Pieter Franken is our third panelist, is the director of Japan operation SafeCast.com Japan, is the co-founder and director of SafeCast Japan, together with Joichi Ito and a few others. He founded a volunteer group that is focused on measuring the environmental and radiation levels in Japan in particular, which is a very important and meaningful speciality in this moment. In his professional work, Pieter's career spans over 20 years in IT, where he specialized in IT management, software engineering, and agile techniques. Pieter, what are you going to, the main ideas you are going to introduce in your exposition?
Okay, thank you very much. I'm very honored to be here today. I'm not a journalist, but as you mentioned, I'm a volunteer actually that together with Joey created a group that is focused on measuring radiation as a response to the Fukushima disaster that happened earlier in the year. I'm actually curious, I wanted to ask all of you two or three simple questions, and when I'm going to talk a little bit later, I'll try to expand on that. First question I have is if you could raise your hand, who has heard about SafeCast? Okay, that's very good. The second question I have is it's a technical question. I'm not sure how much you know about radiation, and that's actually one of the things that is interesting. I didn't know much about radiation until the disaster happened. But the question I have is how many of you think that the radiation level in Tokyo is higher than it is in Hong Kong? Honestly, okay. Then the rest of you think that the radiation level in Hong Kong is higher than Tokyo, is that correct? You don't know, right? So, and that's exactly the problem. You can't see or smell or hear it, and you actually don't know what it is. And though there are official measurements available about what the radiation levels are, they're very, very sparse. And I'm going to talk about how we as a citizen group took action to actually plot out the radiation levels in Japan, and we're also doing that worldwide. And I hope to share a little bit about that.
Thank you. We're fascinating. Could you, with these ideas, to introduce your speeches, please, Robert is going to speak a bit, not to replace, but to innovate in journalism.
Oh, thank you very much. My main point at the beginning is just to show where we come from. And as a television organization, ZDF is one of the national broadcasters in Germany. This is much of the setting that we all know. I think this is a classical situation when people are watching football. And there is one thing with it that comes with it. When I get the next slide, which is not coming. Ah, there it is. If you look at the bottom, it's about many of the ZDF's logos, and these all marks channels and operations, websites, all the things that we have as a traditional media outlet. And as most of you know, we don't only have one outlet nowadays, we have a lot of outlets in the digital world. This is quite necessary. But this is just where we come from, because we are not at the beginning of the digital world, we are already in its first steps. And when you look at the way things are right now, you see a living room that has changed quite a lot, because it's not this mass group thing that people like about television anymore, that people, well, perhaps they're still in the same room, but they're using lots of different devices. You see all these different things that they're doing and watching and using. And there is a corresponding shift for media organizations that you will see at the bottom. There are lots of outlets that ZDF is already using today to distribute its content, but you see these are completely different logos. This is not our world anymore. It's about now our content being part of a much larger world. It can be something that is, well, like a big platform like YouTube. It can be something like other media outlets. Die Zeit is a German newspaper that has content from us. Or it can be just whatever you might imagine. It's not about keeping content with our distribution outlets anymore. It's about letting go, and it's about bringing content to, well, wherever it might be useful throughout the digital world. So, probably know this quite famous quote from J. Rosen, it's the people formerly known as the audience. I think this is much about the change that is going to take place. It's big change that is about. We already heard about linear stories become conversations. I think most of us are quite familiar with this, even if it's not yet reality. But I think the direction to take is quite clear. The audience does get more active. This is something that is happening already now. And they reuse and even alter our content. And me being a news journalist, I admit this at first gives me quite a shudder. What are they doing with my content that I so carefully crafted for them? But this is the old world. It's about making a good point in a conversation that is then going on other places, independent from me as a journalist, and perhaps getting back to me, and I can rejoin in another iteration of this conversation. So, sources go direct, another of the famous quotes from Dave Weiner. You'll hear about that a bit later on with Safecast, giving a good example for that. So, of course, this does create ambivalence and doubt, because we lose control. And we are, as journalists, very much used to have control over what we're doing. And at the same time, there are new possibilities that do arise from these new possibilities. And the old world, at the same time, remains very strong. Classical, traditional media is still very much used in many places of the world. Even newspapers are quite profitable today, not in all places. Television in general is very strong throughout the world. So it would be nonsense today to talk about the demise of old media. It's just not happening. And the classical media organizations are still very, very important and probably will be for some time. So it's ambivalent, a very ambivalent situation where the new is coming, the old is still there, and we don't quite know yet how will they emerge eventually, what is going to take place. So how to respond. Expect the unexpected. I think this is the main point I'd like to make, because frankly, we don't know what is happening. And if we first saw these two guys there, we didn't know them at all, but these were the guys, not belonging to ZDF, who were founding our Twitter account. These were the tweets they were doing, and they were complete strangers. They were not associated in any way with ZDF. They were just fans of what we're doing. And they did a horrendous good job of Twittering for ZDF. And the ZDF online account has 60,000 followers, which is good for Germany. It's in the German top 20 of Twitter. And by now, they're officially Twittering for us because we recognize that they can do it better than we would eventually do. So we hired them. And we gave them all the freedom they need to do their work as they've done before. But this was our way of approaching Twitter, which we probably wouldn't be able to do internally with the people we had at hand at our premises. Or another example of the unexpected and the new, reverse your angle. You see these classical images of newscasters. They are more or less the same around the world. What we're trying to do now is something like that. It is after the newscast where people can Skype in and discuss with the people who have done the newscast about what they've heard. It's a trial, it's quite new. I don't know whether this will be the ultimate form of doing it, but it's a way of just showing, well, it is becoming two-way. It's not that linear, old-fashioned thing anymore. And the third example I'd like to give is, well, let the audience decide. This was one of the website for a digital channel we have, it's called ZDF Neo, for a bit more younger audience. And there people could just have their choice about what program to do. There were 10 pilot shows that were shown there, and people could vote about which of the pilot shows to very rarely have in regular production on the TV channel. And the top 3, in fact, are now in production. So, in a way, classical TV is dead, but long live TV. We have to change to stay who we are. And on our way from mass communication of the old day to communication of the masses, and to build on our strength to learn the new. I think this is the whole conference is about these type of things from a mass media, a traditional media perspective. Well, this is why I'm here to discuss this with you. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Robert. I retain the idea of conversation. It has flourished twice for the moment. Please. I'm sure you will hear you about this concept also.
Thank you. You're going to hear that word conversation again and again. I'm reminded here in Hong Kong, where we're from around the world all speaking English, that people who speak many languages are called multilingual, and people who speak 2 languages are bilingual, and people who speak 1 language are called American. So this is, we're doing a certain amount of repeating of each other, but I think these are points that are worth a bit of repetition, and to focus on this is what media looked like in the last century, and anyone who has studied information in an academic way knows this chart from Claude Shannon, the famous information theorist, who described better really than anyone else how information flowed in a mass media, manufactured media age. And it was very much true, very much the way it worked, and it's very much the way news organizations have worked in the past. In the 21st century, we have something new, and we have an entirely different way that information is flowing, and we don't have yet the kind of theory that we need for it. I spent almost 25 years in newspapers, and being liberated, in a sense, into the world of the technology and the internet and the idea of information going in every direction at once, it changed everything I've been thinking about. But again, there's an ecosystem that's developing. It's not as easy to figure out what is what in the new ecosystem, but it ranges widely from amateur, and I put that in quotes, to professional, and the niche audience to the mass audience. And this is very US-centric, but this is true in all places, in all regions, this kind of ecosystem developing. And I love the ecosystem part because it's more diverse, and in a more diverse ecosystem, that's actually healthier for the overall ecosystem than when it's a monoculture. Because monocultures are catastrophic when something goes wrong. And a diverse ecosystem, it's problematic for the entities that go out of existence within it, but it's overall more stable, and I think that's the kind of thing that we're heading toward. Again, I'm going to just, I don't want to belabor this, the lecture to conversation change is the change that I focus on, and that involves a lot of things for us in journalism. Changing our attitude from knowing everything or pretending that we know everything, and imagining our roles as more of a guide to the good stuff, to the valuable information that people need and want, and that we are quite well able to provide, but only if we really change our attitudes. I think the key message for all of you is that we have to try absolutely everything. That it's easy to try things, and that it's important that we do not fail to try everything, and that we are willing to fail when we try. The willingness to try and fail is more important than any other thing, and it's a lot of the work I'm doing. One, just quickly in the notion of conversation that's very broad, and it means in many ways a couple of things in particular. One is to treat the audience, the former audience, as your partner, as your customer, a valued customer, but a partner too, and a colleague at times, but essentially to not look down on them, but to look across the table at them and have this conversation. So The Guardian has done the crowdsourcing as well as anyone. They've asked their readers for help and done some wonderful journalism as a result. You should all be doing this in all media. The Guardian has innovated in another way, which is to put their news budget online. They're telling you today what they're planning to write in tomorrow's paper. That's pretty brave for old traditional journalists to do, but it makes perfect sense to me. They don't tell everything they're doing if they have a scoop, but they tell you a lot of what they're doing. People in the community know better than we in our newsrooms the conditions in the community, and they can help us with things like this map of the potholes, holes in the streets, because there are not enough journalists in Boston to tell you where all the potholes are, but there are people who live there and who drive over them every day. They know where they are, and they can help collect them. And we should be very willing to use ideas that are from people not involved with journalism, which is why Safecast is so important. This is what I can't wait to see what Pieter's going to do. The non-journalists are helping us create the future of information in our communities. So Fix My Street in London, another great example of things that are journalistic in a sense, in a very real sense, but not invented by regular journalists. I want to stress the importance of data. That data is now everywhere and being created at an unprecedented rate, and it's accelerating. We need to use it in every possible way. We need to make available to others the things we produce through programming methods that are called APIs. But essentially, I want to just encourage you to think about data as a core and fundamental part of what you do and use. Of course, mobility is at the heart of things. Eric Schmidt at Google a couple of years ago told them, think mobile first. I would encourage you to think mobile first in at least some of the products you're doing. The idea that this is the screen on which a lot of us are getting and creating information is a powerful one, and that there are all sorts of things inside the phone creating data along with the things that we create, like photos, the date, the time, the location, the compass heading, whether it's moving in real space. There's all sorts of data being generated at the same time. We can use that, we can do wonderful things with it. And it's not just about providing information to an abstraction we call the audience. It's about information to real people, going from them to places outside and coming back. This is the Ushahidi wonderful crisis mapping from the Haiti earthquake, where real-time information was going to people who could then provide help and being filtered by students at the Tufts University Fletcher School of Diplomacy. A remarkable process that is journalistic, in my opinion, in a fundamental way, but not seen that way by a lot of journalists. My final point here is that in the work that I'm doing at Arizona State University and talking about around the world, the entrepreneurship notion for people going into journalism is crucial, and I'm very jealous of my students because they're starting off at a time that, yes, is very complicated and messy and difficult, but that the field in front of them is open. They can create the future, they must create the future. So to you students here, I am insanely jealous of you because you're starting at a time I wish that I were starting. And you're going to be the ones to invent the future, not me. And so please do, and please help us find that future. And I will repeat what I said before, try everything. It doesn't cost much to try, and the potential is enormous. And more than that, we have to try. Thank you.
Thank you, Dan. Maybe trying is inexpensive, but it does cost an effort. Anyway, please, Pieter.
Welcome, good morning. I already asked you two questions, and you may have been pondering as to which is higher, and I'll talk about it in a moment, where the radiation is higher. And the reason I was asking is because that was the question I asked myself when the earthquake happened in March. I live in Tokyo. And the first thing that came to mind was, what are the levels outside? And that is how Safecast basically started. So when the earthquake happened, we basically were in kind of information dark ages. Most of the communications were not working. And actually the only thing that worked at the time were Twitter accounts and Skype conversations. And the real problem was lack of information. I helped some journalists actually to get into Japan and get to the disaster zone and stuff like that, but it was really, really difficult to get any good information. There was lots of panic that happened around that time. So what happened is that we wanted to measure radiation and wanted to know for our own families, are we safe or not? And at that time, I was talking to Joe Ito, who is joining here today, and one of my other friends in the US, and we said, can we do something? Joyo was at that time in Boston, and the other friend, Sean Bonner, was in LA, and I was in Tokyo. And we said, maybe we can collect data about radiation and put it on the internet, and that way we can share with people what is happening. It was a very good idea, but the only problem is that there was no information to share. So our simplistic, great idea of crowdsourcing failed because there was no real good data. The only data available were a few universities that had some dusty old equipment on the roof that was measuring background radiation, not really the stuff you need to measure a nuclear fallout disaster, so that didn't work. Okay, so then we said, well, maybe we can distribute Geiger counters, and we buy a bunch and we give them to people, they go measure and they'll report back. And a very good idea, but it also failed because there were no Geiger counters. It's very funny, Geiger counter technology is there for close to 100 years, but the equipment is very, very hard to get. The reason for that is the sensors are hard to make, and there's actually no real demand for it. So the total stock of Geiger counters was sold out literally within 24 hours after the earthquake happened. And you couldn't get anything decent anymore. So then we said, okay, what we'll do is we'll build our own equipment, and we'll then put them on a car, and then we'll start driving around, and then we'll collect the data ourselves, and then we put it on the internet, and maybe that will work. And then we also said, let's do it really fast, because the sooner we have the data out, the better it is for the crisis that is happening. Okay, and that's exactly what we did. So what happened is we used lots of social media. All of this, what we did over the last 6-7 months, all done through the internet. We used Skype, we used Twitter accounts, we used internet chat rooms, we used all kind of forms of Google Docs or whatever to basically work out our strategy. And all the people that we even today are connected to us, they all connect through the internet. All our volunteers, we have more than 150 volunteers at the moment, they all connect through the internet and they find us through the internet. So very quickly, we started with a few people, but very, very quickly, we had literally more than 100 people working on the problem. And we collected people out of the community. We collected people that are very good at building their own hardware. We had hardware designers, then we got software developers. We got people that are good at distributing data. We got web developers. We got people that could organize volunteers. And we got a whole group of people assembled that started to work on this puzzle. So these are some of the people that currently are working. We have a core team of 40 people right now that are working in their free time as much as they can on Safecast. Now, so what we did is that we literally, and I'm going to show you some pictures because it's much easier to see people in action, to see what actually happens, because you think everybody was sitting behind their computers looking at a Twitter account. Actually, in fact, all of these triggered real action. So we built our own hardware platform. And here are some people in a place called Tokyo Hackerspace in Tokyo putting it together. And we put it on cars. You can see here, this is the system, and I brought it today. So I can show you. This is a system we built, and we call it the BGEIGI. BGEIGI stands for Bento Geiger Counter System. The reason is it just looks like a bento box. Bento box is Japanese for a lunchbox. And as you can see, it is very small. Inside there is a Geiger counter inside the system here, and under the Geiger counter is a computer using open hardware, and there's open software running on that, and it has a GPS modem in there. So as we drive, it maps radiation. And you can see here, it just fits on a car window. It looks a little bit floppy, but this basically goes through your car window. You shut down the car window, and it sits very, very solidly on the car. You can drive very fast, it will not drop off. It's also weatherproof, so you can measure as it is raining, which is important in Japan because of the weather conditions there. And so that's what we built. And then we said, how do we gonna carry it around? So we had some volunteers that took the bicycle literally and put the system on it, have been mapping radiation. We also thought, maybe after the Fukushima disaster, we should do something about green energy. So we teamed up with Tesla cars to drive around the system. This was one. We had lots of volunteers that wanted to do that. This is actually one of our cars that we got donated, which we're driving with a lot right now. These are volunteers in a city called Iwaki. Iwaki is about 30 kilometers south of the Daiichi power plant. And this is one team that has mapped their own city. They took about 2 months to do that. They mapped every single street and corner of the city. It's a very large city, by the way. It's about 400,000 people there. These are some of our volunteers in another city called Aizu. This group are people that got evacuated from the no-go zone, and they are currently measuring the radiation in Fukushima Prefecture. These are fairly young people that basically lost everything, jobs and everything, but they're extremely focused on getting their own environment measured. This is what you'll get at the 20-kilometer point. You can go in there. So we also wanted to help people. Lots of people want to know what is the radiation in front of their door. And it's very interesting. The data that was published by the government, or still is being published, is fairly high level. And people actually just want to know what is the radiation level in their house. And there's lots of people that got evacuated out of the no-go zone, and we wanted to help those people as well. And we teamed up with Tokyo University professor and some people from K University. And they went into the no exclusion zone with our equipment. You can see it, you can also hang it over here, you can actually walk with it. And they also measured the radiation in front of the Fukushima Daiichi plant. I think we're the only organization outside of the government that has actually measured in the zone and published the data on the web. Here you can see this is Mr. Yoshida. He is evacuated from the zone. He's looking at the radiation levels around his house on our map. This is a person that we made Geiger counters in Fukushima. We've been helping these people. And this is our scientific department of our team. We have very high-end equipment to measure radiation, which we use to see what type of pollution is there. We're also trying to measure air pollution at the moment. And we have been trying to measure the levels on the ocean itself. Okay, so to basically what is important here is that though information became available about radiation levels, we felt it was very important as citizens to measure the levels ourselves. And what the government can't do is what citizens can do is you can measure your own environment. So basically, we have now, in many cities of Japan, people are using our system and they drive around their own neighborhoods and they know what they want to measure. They want to measure the school, they want to measure the house or whatever the places they go. And they have basically been measuring since April. And we now have, this is in October, but we now in November, we have now done about 1.5 million measurements in Japan and a few measurements outside of Japan. And it is now possible for the most affected areas, people can punch in their zip code and they can see their street and they can see the level of radiation in that. And what it has done is it has changed their mindset tremendously. Lots of the stress that came with the disaster is not being able to understand and know where the radiation is. And if you go to our website, you will see that radiation is very hard to predict. The radiation that is near the plant is lower than areas that are far away from the plant, and vice versa. It is hard to pinpoint it unless you actually go and drive around every street in Japan. You can't really predict what levels you find. It has to do with how the fallout happened, and it happened in a very fairly random manner. By providing this information, lots of people are using our maps to basically find out their neighborhood. And if they can't find their neighborhood, lots of people just volunteer to say, I'll come and drive the system in my neighborhood, so I can share it with people around me. These are some of the examples of the map. Again, I think the best thing is if you go to our website, you can see various types of maps, but you can keep on zooming in on the map. That's the most important thing. As you keep on zooming in, you will see that the levels, the detail keeps on increasing, and you can go onto the street level almost, and you can see what it exactly is. What also happened is we started to create information that was not available anywhere else. And in Japan, Yahoo actually took our data and they put it on their own news website as the radiation map for Japan. So we started to basically become a reference for radiation measurement. And we're extending that right now. We're talking to other people that want to do the same thing. What is important to understand is that we have been focusing on distributing this data as open data. We're using a framework called Creative Commons that some of you may be aware of. And we're publishing everything as under a Creative Commons 0 designation, which basically means is that our data is public domain. Anybody can copy it for commercial, non-commercial use and do anything with it they want to, which means is that the radiation data can be shared, can be reused by researchers or other people as freely as they want to do. What is very interesting is that almost all other radiation measurement data that is available from Japanese authorities, universities, etc., is all copyright protected. So our initial idea to aggregate that and redistribute failed primarily because of that. But we now have basically measured entire Japan, so we don't need that aggregation anymore. Then finally, lots of news picked up our story. We have been featured on PBS, and we've been featured in German news and in Japanese news in various types of contexts talking about radiation. Okay, so what does it mean? It means that citizens can team up and use the technologies of today to dramatically change the understanding we have of the environment. And you can imagine that if I take this box and I put another sensor in here, for example, a pollution sensor, we can do exactly the same thing for that. And by using low-cost technologies that are easy to use by ordinary people, actually citizens can start plotting their environment themselves. And what is very interesting is that you always will find surprises in that. There's other people that measure other things than radiation, and there's lots of things that come out of that. So in a very short amount of time, using the power of the internet, using the focus that the problem created, the focal point, we were able to do this. Now, our next goal is to complete our map for Japan, hopefully by the anniversary of the earthquake or in March, and we're working very hard towards that. What is very interesting is that initially radiation was kind of stigmatized in Japan because lots of people thought that it was only supposed to be done by authorities and companies and individuals who are actually very scared to measure it themselves. That has dramatically changed over the last 6 months, I think primarily because we have been so open about it. And we now are having a hard time actually fulfilling all the requests we get for equipment to go and measure other parts of Japan. So we're now working with various groups to finish the map, and we hope that by March timeline we can say that we have covered a good chunk of the rest of Japan we have not covered yet. And the interesting thing is though we don't expect major surprises in areas we have not measured yet, people that live there just want to have independent check by people like themselves, what are the levels here. They don't want to go with one source. You want to have like a second opinion when you go to the doctor, right? And if you go to our website, you will have Twitter accounts, etc. I wanted to finish by saying, you know, the answer to the question I had earlier is that the radiation level in Hong Kong is about 3 times higher than what it is in Tokyo. Now, I'm not sure if that is news to you, but you could, if you're interested in that, I can explain you later maybe why that is so. But what is interesting is it is hard to predict, and you don't know what is around in the environment you're until you actually go and measure it actively street by street. What is interesting is I measured radiation in the hotel room here, and it is literally 3 times higher than my bedroom in Tokyo, all right? So, and there's a reason for that, but it's very important that, you know, once you actually do it, you can't just assume that, yeah, it's safe or it's okay. You have to go and check it. The last thing I wanted to finish is that we're a volunteer organization. We do take donations and we do take volunteers. So if you're interested, please let me know later on. Okay, thank you so much.
So probably the conference should be followed in Tokyo, not here. Anyway, thank you, Pieter. I do think to start the conversation, I think that the key concept is a bit about the key concept and the common line in your different approaches. There is a common concept, which is the conversation, which is interactivity, which is taking part. And you are asking us to a cultural change, to change of attitudes also. But I wonder how should do that. How learning to relearn again, to learn again. I wonder how to do that. I doubt if it is just back to basics, to hear, to look at, etc., or we need other more complex attitudes in order to this cultural operation. It's just of our minds and our organizations. Could you react a bit, interact on that point, if is it a good basis?
I think from a point of view of a big classical organization, you need a bit of all of what you've mentioned. Of course, you need back to basics, because as a journalist, the better you're when you're close to people, and you need that connection to what is going on in the world, and you absolutely have to build upon that. This is one of the basic things of our profession. But in order to become in a way effective in our organizations, you need good leadership. And this, especially for the higher echelons of our companies, this means creating space, giving people who want to experiment the space to do it, encouraging them, network them with other people within the company and beyond the company, and not only thinking about optimizing your classical approach or optimizing business models, all these things that are very common if you talk to managers in the media business. I think we really have to open up again, and this has to start from the top.
It relates a lot of try everything, as you said.
Yes, try everything, but within the context of some basic principles that don't change. And the journalism, if it's going to matter, has some fundamental principles that we all would agree on, I think. And the tactics that we use and the techniques and the tools that we use to achieve, to further those principles will change constantly. But if we start with the principles, then we are then we can think about trying lots of different things. But I think it does take some buy-in, some agreement at the top of an organization to want to do it. And I do recognize that there are institutional barriers often to making these shifts, that some of which cannot be overcome easily. But if people don't try, and if people don't say, well, I'm willing to I'm willing to fail at some of these experiments, then very little will get done.
As I explained, my background is not journalism, but what is very interesting is that I think the real shift or the difference is that the tools that we have available today make it so much more easier for ourselves as citizens to participate in things that normally were not possible. And if you go back in time, 25 years ago, we had the Chernobyl disaster. There was no internet, and there was no easy flow of information at the time for political reasons, all kind of reasons. And I was just talking we were just talking about that, Germany was affected at the time, Holland, I'm from Holland, but Holland also was affected. But the amount of information at that time, as far as I remember, I was in high school, was basically what we saw on the news, we trusted that, and we just went on with our lives. But today, because you can tap in the information, you can add on to that, you can go and verify, and you can interact with that very, very differently. And I think that is one of the things I experienced when doing this type of volunteer work. I had a Twitter account, and actually Joey had me open that a couple of years ago, and I never saw the need for, or I never understood why what is this good for, until the earthquake happened, where it became kind of an immediate way to communicate with people. And when we started this work, we actually used it to create a kind of a sense of action. This is what is happening right now. Can we get people to help out? And stuff like that. So those tools, when they come together, are very, very powerful. And the same thing is true for things like hardware, which used to be, typically you need to have a company and you need to have lots of equipment to make hardware. But today you can actually make these type of devices yourself by going onto the internet, and literally, it comes to your doorstep, and you can manufacture it on your own. So those type of combination of the device, which is for most people a mobile phone these days, but it could also be something that you have assembled for you, and the combination of the internet create a very different playing field for citizens and people to participate in, I think, what is news creation.
Just to amplify on that, I'm not surprised, but it's a shame that the partner for this was not NHK or Asahi or Nikkei or some large media company in Japan. But that's the way it is, and I just emphasize for the people from media companies that if we don't do this, they will. And it seems better to either do it ourselves or partner even better with the people who are doing these kinds of things, because it's about our communities and our and their betterment and their information.
I'm sure, before giving the floor to the whole, I'm sure that you, Robert, you share this idea that we have so many tools that it was unthinkable some years ago, but that leads also to new problems and new risks. For instance, I noted cautiously, let the audience decide. Okay, let the audience decide, but haven't we the risk to decide in a wrong manner, in a wrong conclusion, in the sense that if we take strictly this principle, that couldn't lead us to, for instance, expanding the TV shows which are shit, which are so expanded overall in some countries, some Mediterranean countries, for instance.
Well, I basically, even after 20 years in the business, I do trust the audience. I think there are many reasons not to, but I still do. And I think this is because if we rarely engage in a conversation, it is not about one way anymore, and it is not about inversing the one way. It's not about letting the audience decide and then dictate to us. It's about a conversation, and that means that we, of course, as journalists, have our position. We have our ethics, we have our professionalism. All this we bring into this conversation. And this will enrich the conversation. I think I'm deeply convinced that even in a digital world, journalism have something to contribute to this, and something that the public alone cannot do. But in a conversation, it is two-way. We will get something back, and we will get much more feedback about what we do, and in a way that will, when we do it right, enhance the quality of what is going on. When we just want to optimize the business model, well, then we will end up with this sort of television that you are referring to, that we can watch all over the world. But this is simply driven by the need to amplify a business model. And I think journalism is not about that. We've always have been idealists, and I think we should remain idealists, and somehow to bring it together, of course, with viable models to make money, because we need that to survive. But it's about the ideas that are driving us, and I'm still convinced that this will work.
Should we reformulate a bit your expressions as let us, the audience, co-decide? Dan?
I'm happy with this.
Yeah? Dan? Let us, let the audience co-decide.
Can we decide with us together?
I'm not sure what I don't have any one-line solution. I think, again, in some cases, the audience can vote and make decisions. In another case, the audience will be part of the process in a different way. And in some cases, the journalists just do the job the journalist was trained to do, and then get things from the audience. There are a million ways to bring people into this process. I wouldn't just say that it's all co-decisions, but it's collaboration in a variety of ways.
Your feeling?
I think, this is my personal opinion. I think the effect of news is changing because the information itself is available on the internet. You don't need a journalist to find it. Like the measurements we did were new. Nobody had done it. We did it. We published it. But what journalists can play a role, in my mind, is to take the various sources of information, compare them, and try to figure out what does it actually mean. More investigative. I see lots of articles that were written about the Fukushima disaster that actually are very poor journalism. Nobody checked actually the government reported values at all. All they needed to do was just go to our website, and you will find it's different. So you as a journalist, you can maybe start to more focus as, we have all this variety of information. Not all of it is correct, not all of it is meaningful, but what can I do with it? It's like you have more sources, but you have to then spend more time to actually what is the point? What does it mean in terms of policy or effect to the economy, people's health, or whatever it is. And that, I think, is a big challenge for journalists as they are moving away from having the scoop towards, what does the data actually tell us, and how does that affect society? And I think that is the shift, I think, that is happening in the news media to some extent.
So should we expand a bit the conversation among everybody? Down there is after. Wait a second for the micro.
My name is David Michaelis from Internews, USA. I think Safecast is a very good example how you break down the system that tries to disinform you. If you take earthquake in China or the Fukushima in Japan, two very different political systems. But the people in power are the same. They want to disinform the citizen about what's happening, and everything has to be opaque. So Safecast is a very good example of crisis situation, which succeeds to break down this wall of disinformation. And I don't think that CCTV or NHK, in case of Japan, would have collaborated with them, because I think they're part of the power system. So I think citizen journalism in some cases has a unique role that state broadcasting will not work with. And I think they're doing a great job. Thank you.
Want to react?
I can react on it very quickly. And I think there are governments in a situation like that have lots of challenges. But what is interesting, though, is we have been picked up by the Japanese media to some extent, but I think the dilemma for the Japanese media is that the government has published their measurements. We have our measurements, and though we have been featured on Japanese primetime television, the feature was more about foreigners in Japan measuring radiation, but actually what we measured and how that compared, they left that out. And I can understand that, because the moment they would actually react to that, that would create a problem vis-a-vis their Japanese government. And I don't think they have been willing to go and do the journalistic bit to say, you know, what are all these values telling us. And that's not only true for the Japanese media, also all the foreign media have not done that. So there's lots of opportunities, if you're a journalist here, to write a good article about that. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Here.
Well, my name is Thomas Louden. I'm with the VJ Movement. I would just like to say thank you to Mr. Franken, because his remarks are extremely important for what we're discussing here these days. I think he's pointing out that we can talk about all the ethical values that we say we have as journalists, but his simple remark that not a lot of good journalism was actually done and not a lot of journalists actually saw the work he's doing is true in so many cases. And I think we as journalists have to take that to heart.
Thank you for your contribution. Here. Here and down there. I was expecting you.
Tarek
Please.
Ataya from the Egypt Media Development Program. I think the comment Dan Gillmor made was very astute about why major media organizations don't often join up with major citizen journalism efforts. And I wonder, I mean, you've worked in the traditional news business. What are the ways to get beyond the barriers that prevent these kind of collaborations? Egos, management structures that don't contribute to this, speed. You know, what are your suggestions? Because I think you're very right in saying that if they don't do it, they're going to lose out. Yeah. But how to get beyond that?
Tactically, there are a couple of ways to imagine doing it. One is to from the top of the organization, have someone say, we will do this, and make it part of people's evaluations for how they get paid. That things get done when that happens. Another is to just have projects that are very much put as experiments and saying, you know, we don't know if this is going to work, but we want to bring people into it and provide places on your websites for people to participate. CNN, who we'll hear from later, is doing that in some ways, and as are others, but doing it in a way that is not just inviting people to provide you with content that you then monetize. I would be discouraging of that. But it's really about attitude. And it's still true in the U.S. in most cases. The blogosphere, Twitter, Facebook, everything else is considered a kind of parallel universe rather than integral and part of that diversifying ecosystem. If you think about it from the ecosystem point of view, then you're just a part of it. And the others are a part of it, and that the partnership potential is enormous and to the benefit of everybody. So attitude is where it starts.
Thank you, then. Down there. My Egyptian friend.
Samah Abdullah, Al-Ahram, Egypt. I'm asking Robert and Dan, you have made very good points, and that made me think if our profession, journalism, will last for long, or us as mass media people will be needed in our societies anymore. In another way, I believe audience or the people were relying on us because they didn't have the access to each other. They didn't have the tools to exchange information. Now they became key players. They are more efficient. They are everywhere. They can just video whatever they see, pass it to every other person. So you are talking about cooperation between us and them. I believe they are going to overcome us at one point. I'm just asking, these are thoughts I would like to exchange with you. So my question is, or do you think that journalists or traditional journalism will last for long, or the people will just gather the information and exchange, and we will be out of that? So Dan, you were telling the students here that they have a better future. I won't make a comment.
Thank you, Robert.
Another quick question to Franken. Why should you measure radiation in every street? I mean, do you expect differences from one street to another in the same city? Thank you.
Shall I answer that very quickly? The answer is yes. That is what we discovered, is that it does change that dramatically. It depends a little bit on how much fallout there is in a specific area, but the more the fallout is, the more variable it is. And I can give you quickly a reason for that. If you think of a city with roofs and gutters and stuff, so when the fallout happened, that stuff didn't come down equally, and then as it came down, it redistributed itself, and it creates what I call micro hotspots, literally hotspots that are a couple of houses big. And literally around the house, you can measure radiation that can vary from, technical term, like let's say that you could be in a house. Around the house, you could measure in front of the house, let's say 0.3, 0.4 microsieverts. Inside the house, you can measure 0.5. And in the back garden, you can measure over 1 microsievert. So the radiation does change dramatically. And that's why we're measuring it street by street. The other reason is very simple, is people want to know their street, the radiation, not the city hall or the neighbors. They want to know their house. And it's very personal, but that is, that is what people gives them the reassurance that whatever they thought it is, this is what it is. So that's the reason why we do that. Yes, thank you.
Thank you, Robert.
Well, about are journalists necessary in the next years and a couple of years or decades? If you go back, what is journalism about? Where did it arise? It comes from storytelling. Good journalists are good storytellers, by whatever means. It can be data journalism, it can be just something that they've seen, it is something, a conversation that is well organized, that gives a good story. Storytelling is much older than anything that we know. It is very, very human. And even in a self-organized world of crowdsourcing, helped by technical means of the internet, it's still about stories. And I think if journalism keeps to this classical role of good, informed, educational storytelling, we will succeed.
Thank you, Robert. Dan, will you add?
Very quickly, storytelling, context, and a variety of things that journalists do well. But I'm, as I said in our meeting yesterday, I'm very uninterested in who we call a journalist. I'm much more interested in what we call journalism. And that, I want to see journalism continue, and I think it will. And I'm indifferent, frankly, about whether the people who are calling themselves journalists today are the ones who will do it. I think many of them will, but it's going to be, again, diverse and much more interesting.
I'm glad the concept of storytelling. Yes,
last
one.
question from Steve Herman from BBC. But really, the last question, and then we have the coffee break.
Thanks, Bertrand. Steve Herman from BBC News. I found the discussion really interesting, and particularly the try everything within certain principles and how you foster innovation in a large media company particularly. And I wanted to ask Robert, actually, what practical experience have you had, or have you got any examples of what role leadership plays in that, and how you make those right connections, and how you give people the space to innovate?
Well, I will give you a good and a bad example, and I will not tell you where it does come from. A large media organization in Germany, the editorial head of it, just does not trust any source that does come from the internet. He definitely wants printed sources. It's not a source if it's not printed. Well, people like that discourage all the participation in the new world, and they will eventually utterly destroy journalism in its most basic form. I'm very clear on that. So, on the other hand, if you really try to encourage people to try anything new, and to trust sources with all the journalistic professionalism that you can have, that are perhaps very new sources, that are not in the classical way of doing your research. And telling these stories in a new way and allowing this. That means that opening your pages and your shows and your news shows and what you have, your websites, for these new experiments, then the learning will start. Because what it needs, especially for old big organizations, is a big collective learning experience. And learning starts with doing something new.
Thank you. Thank you then to all of you gentlemen for such a stimulating session.